Hello everyone and welcome. Today's video is especially for people new to watercolours. I'm going to take you through the process step by step for how to paint this tulip bouquet. All the materials I'm using are listed in the description box below, but I'll also run through what you need to follow along. The paper is Daler-Rowney 300 GSM watercolour paper. Dimensions are 20 by 17 centimetres. I've used masking tape to keep it in place for this video, but you'll probably find it easier not to tape it down and have the ability to twist it around in order to put paint onto the paper from any angle. I've got a couple of sheets of kitchen towel, clean water in an old jam jar, and a combination of both tube and palette block watercolours. You could use a combination like me or just exclusively one type or the other, and you'll be able to achieve basically the same results as I have here. I've got the tubes because this palette doesn't actually have any black or white, and I've run out of the shade of green, which for reference is called Sap Green. The brushes are a combination of Daler-Rowney synthetic number 6 round and number 2 round brush, and the other two brushes are from Royal and Langbickel number 10 round brush and number 0 round detail brush. An idea for starting out is buying a pack of about 5 brushes in a range of sizes, and that should work well for entering into the world of watercolour painting. Also, you will need a HB pencil and an eraser. I'm going to start with the heads of the tulips. Taking your pencil, lightly draw 4 vertical ovals loosely in the pattern of an arc. They don't need to be perfect or neat, they're literally here as a guide. Once you've drawn the first one, the top of which sits 3.2 centimetres from the top and is 3.2 centimetres vertically and 2 centimetres horizontally, draw the next one down and to the left and also rotate it so it's pointing towards the top left corner of the paper. On the third, the top of the oval will line up with the bottom point of oval number 2 and it will point towards the top right of the page. Finally, oval number 4 will be on the left hand side and sit under oval number 2, sitting diagonally again. Next, take an eraser and rub out the top third of each of your ovals, which will turn them into the shape of a capital letter U. Following on from this, using the number 6 brush, I'm going to use some white paint along with a flame red and magenta. If you don't happen to have any magenta, so long as you have red, then that will be sufficient for this. You need a really generous amount on the tray. When you think you have enough, actually add more. When you rinse your brush, gently press it horizontally onto the kitchen towel to remove excess water when you move from one colour to the next. When you have a generous amount of both the red and the magenta on the tray, mix them together. Then put more red onto the tray in an area below the magenta red mix and start to mix this with your white. The general rule with watercolour painting is when mixing colours together, always gradually add your stronger and darker colour to your lighter colour and keep adding until you have the colour you're happy with, which in this case is a nice pink. Once this process is complete, you'll be left with a pink and rich magenta red on your tray. To begin painting, take the pink you just mixed and really saturate your brush with paint. And starting with the top left-hand oval that became a letter U, or if you're left-handed, far right letter U, start painting just inside the line of the letter U and then carry the line up and out into a flick. Follow this with a curve which begins 2/3 of the way across the width of the U shape. Bringing the two together, make it resemble the shape of two sides of a curved triangle. These give the impression of a petal. Repeat this on the left hand side but smaller and lower. When you join these up together, it will become like a capital letter M with curved lines. Then fill it in so it's one solid block of pink. Repeat this approach on the other 3 capital U pencil guides you drew a moment ago. Once these are all filled in, rinse your brush, blot it on the kitchen towel and saturate your brush in the magenta red mix. And starting with the first tulip you painted, you'll be painting a line that follows the top curved letter M shape. Bringing the middle down but keeping the curve as if you're in the process of making a teardrop shape. Then turn your brush so the tip is on the new red line and gently press your brush onto the page and drag the red down the flower to about the halfway point. Next, without rinsing your brush, go back to the pink. And again with your brush pointing towards the top of the flower, drag paint from the top midpoint of the larger petal around in a gentle curve, but keeping in mind that teardrop shape. Drag the paint all the way down to the bottom of the flower, and then finally pull the paint from the bottom of the flower along the curved line you've just made and take it up to the top to reinforce this shape. And then repeat this for the other tulips. Another way of approaching painting in the petal shapes is after you've painted the curved red capital M shape at the top of the flower, starting from the middle of the bottom, paint a curved line that follows the curve of the flower up and around to the top. Then, with the tip of the brush on the bottom starting point of the curve, drag your brush up the flower, following the curve with the tip always in contact with the red line. Then, follow it with some pink and do the same thing. And lastly, using the pink, pull your brush round from the bottom red curve around the left-hand outer curve of the tulip all the way up to the top left-hand point. A third option is once you've painted the curved M shape along the top and dragged it down, rinse your brush, blot it on the kitchen towel, and with your clean damp brush, pull the paint back up towards the top petal line. You can do any of these. The most effective, I think, is probably the first process. I would say the last process is the most simple. It literally comes down to whether you want to give the impression of a petal shape filling the whole flower. Okay, the next part of the process is the tulip stalks and leaves. I'm using the number 6 brush and some of the Sap Green. Again, if you're using palette block watercolours, a generous amount will be needed. Remember to put the green onto your tray, and when you think you have enough, I would recommend you probably want to put a bit more. By having a lot of paint on your tray, when you pick up the paint with your brush, the colour will be more vibrant. Saturating your brush with green, paint a line that begins just below the top left-hand flower, but not actually touching. Pull the paint down in a line which slightly curves towards the bottom left-hand flower, 5 centimeters in length. It doesn't have to be exact, but so long as your line is roughly this length, then you'll be able to get a more accurate repetition of what I'm painting. Then thicken up the middle, but keep the ends narrow. Next, paint a shorter, slightly curved line under the bottom left flower, just under 3 centimeters from bottom to top. The curve will be pushing towards the first line stem you painted. Again, it shouldn't touch the flower. Actually, for this painting, as you go along, unless stated otherwise, try to avoid each component from touching the other components. The third stem will begin under the top flower, gently curving down to just over 4 centimeters in length. It will look very similar to the first stem you painted, but the bottom should stop above the bottom of the first stem. Then, using a measurement of 1 centimeter up from the bottom of the stem you've just painted as a reference point, 1 millimeter to the right, paint a loosely curved line, this is going to be its leaf, 6.5 centimeters in length that skims past the right-hand side of the tulip head. Follow this method for the last tulip with a stem just over 7 centimeters in length that curves up towards the rest of the flowers. And once that's on the paper, I'm going to add a leaf. This time beginning about 1 centimeter from the bottom of the stem, with it starting from the inside of the stem. Paint a curved line 9 centimeters in length. You know, I think tulips are such a cheerful flower, and when they're in season in the UK, they're actually pretty inexpensive. I feel that fresh flowers in general in the house are so uplifting. Perhaps it's a sense of bringing some of nature inside, especially at the moment with restrictions in place for how much we're actually allowed outside. I'd be interested to know what your favourite flower is. Mine are currently peonies. I just think they're absolutely beautiful. Okay, so for the last part of the tulip stage of the painting, going over to the bottom left tulip, thicken up the stem a little, and then add a leaf to the stem beginning 0.5 centimetre from the bottom and pulling it out from inside the stem to a length of 5 centimetres. The top curving away from the tulip head and leaving a space of 5 centimetres between the top of the leaf and the flower head. And that is the 4 tulips completed. Then rinse your brush, blot it on kitchen towel and put some clean water into your pot. Part 2 of the bouquet consists of pieces of light green foliage. Now for this, if you still have a lot of the sap green left on your tray, then you can use that. But if you're running low, usually if you've been using paint from a dry block, then go ahead and put a generous amount onto the tray. Next, to make a light and fresh shade of green, go to the yellow paint and put lots of this onto the tray. As always here, you want to be able to saturate your brush with paint when you come to put your marks on the paper. Rinse your brush and then start adding green to the yellow until you have a lime green on your tin. Now using the smallest brush, go over to the far left, beginning just over 2.5 centimetres from the bottom of the paper. Paint a thin, gently waving line that is 7 centimetres in length. This is where having paper that's not taped to the table is an advantage, because you'll probably have noticed I've had to move around to the side of this table and paint it in from another angle, whereas you'll simply be able to just rotate the paper if it isn't stuck down. Alternatively, just make sure that the tulips, flower heads and stems are completely dry before you start painting these thin wavy lines in. Follow this first line with a long, thin 10 centimetre line that travels between the topmost tulip and the one on the right hand side, and finally a 6 centimetre softly waving thin line on the right hand side of the tulip on the far right. Once all 3 lines are painted, rinse your brush, blot it and pick up the number 4 brush. Dip it in the lime green paint and starting on the last softly waving line you painted, start painting in small leaf shapes going up the line. Each of the leaves running up these narrow stems should resemble a teardrop shape, but with a curve. You want the leaves to get gradually smaller as you move further up the line. Try to make sure that none of the leaves touch their stem or the tulips next to them. The overall impression within this painting is that the different types of foliage are intertwining but not actually touching. Repeat the process of painting in these curved teardrop shaped leaves up the stem of the other 2 thin green lines. Now for some reason, bouquets of flowers also make me think of afternoon tea with fresh scones. Now there's a question, do you say scone or scone? Even more so, do you apply jam then cream or cream then jam? Up until quite recently, I didn't actually like cream, so personally I was just jam. I think I take after my dad in that way. Neither of us are big dairy fans, well, other than cheese. My grandma used to make wonderful scones and cakes. The tradition when we went to stay with my grandparents on my dad's side was she would rise early and make fresh scones for breakfast, which is a little unconventional, but I absolutely loved it. And we would have them with homemade jam made by my granddad, who had an allotment and grew lots of his own fruit and vegetables. I think a lot of families have these traditions and customs which might be considered a little bit unusual or unique to them, but end up being loved. What about you in your family, or even within your group of friends? I'd love to know. Another family favourite was what me and my brothers still refer to as grandma pie, which is a very simple beef pie with short crust pastry, but it has really wonderful associations. Okay, now bringing your attention back to the painting, when you paint these leaves it should become quite methodical and hopefully relaxing, as it's a matter of repeating the shapes over and over as you move up the stem, but altering the size as you go. Once those leaves are all in place, it's time to rinse your brush, blot it and get ready to paint some purple flowers, continuing to use the same brush. For this, use a clean part of your tray. I like to use a metal tray. In this instance, this used to be the lid of a pencil tin. A metal tray or the lid of your box of watercolours will both work just as well as each other. Personally, I like this metal lid because it gives me more space for mixing my paint. Apply an ample amount of purple to your tray. I'm trying to avoid overusing the word generous. Then rinse your brush, blot, and after dipping your brush into a little bit of water, go over to a Cobalt Blue. If you don't have Cobalt Blue or aren't sure, that's not a problem. Just make sure the colour looks blue. Mix the purple and blue together, rinse your brush, Blot it on your kitchen towel and follow this by putting some white onto your tray. You might notice that when I put my brush into the white there's a purple residue. This isn't actually a problem because I'm about to mix the purple with the white. Mix them together until you've made a lilac colour, and then add a bit more purple in to prevent the colour from becoming too soft. The colours in this bouquet all pop nicely to create an illustration that's vibrant and cheerful. In between the two left-hand side topmost tulips, just below the flower heads, paint a chunky teardrop shape with the point facing inwards. Then paint another 3 in different sizes, avoiding being too precise. Use the placement of the tulip heads as a guide to the overall shape of the purple flower. Ensure that you avoid the 3 flowers from touching each other. Once this is in place, the next purple flower will be above the right-hand tulip head. With the 4 petals, create a chunky X shape where the bottom half has a petal either side of the top petal of the tulip, like it's using the tulip as a seat. These flowers don't have to be particularly neat or precise, just try to look for gaps between other plants on the page and avoid the purple flowers from touching other components. Regarding the shape of these flowers, some will be slightly wonky, chunky X shapes, while on others add in an additional petal so that these flowers consist of 5 petals. In total, make sure that you paint 7 purple flowers around the bouquet. Then rinse your brush, blot it, and going back over to your paints, put some purple paint onto the tray and mix with a little bit of the Cobalt Blue. After this, put a little bit of black onto the tray and add a small amount to the purple and blue mixture you made. You really won't need much as the black very easily overpowers the other colours. You'll see I also add a bit more of both the purple and blue to the mix to brighten the colour up a little bit. However, so long as you end up with a colour that looks like a dark purple, or as I'm now going to refer to it from now on, indigo, then you're okay to move on. As always, saturate your brush and gently apply several dots of indigo into the middle of each of the purple flowers. Now when the indigo paint goes onto the lighter purple flower, because the lighter purple paint is still wet, the indigo will blend out by itself and create what I think is a rather nice two-tone effect. Our purple and indigo flowers are going to be followed by some delicate red sprigs. I would advise putting some clean water into your jar and then taking the number 6 brush, put an ample amount of magenta onto the tray. Again, if you don't have any magenta, mix red with a little bit of purple. The colour I'm aiming for is a really rich, intense red. When it comes to painting these particular flowers, it's really important that you make sure your brush is really full of paint, and this is easier if you have a lot of paint available to be scooped up on your tray. Now, with the tip of your brush, dot red speckles on the right-hand side of the far right tulip head, keeping the dots close to each other, but leaving gaps where the paper is showing through and the dots aren't touching. The placement of the dots needs to allow the top of the tulip leaf to protrude through the middle of it. Something to be mindful of here is the more saturated with paint your brush is, the more effective this will be. You'll only need to lightly dot the tip of your brush onto the paper each time, and the paint being held by the brush will happily go and sit on the paper for you. Ideally, you want each dot to look like a small water droplet. Then, going over the dots you've just painted, go over them a second time with more light dotting in order to join some of them together, but still leaving areas of negative space in between the dots. All of these red sprigs will have an overall shape that's quite rounded with uneven edges, almost like they've been sprayed onto the paper. They're quite whimsical, but with enough visual weight to sit comfortably next to all the other brightly coloured flowers and foliage. I'm going to paint in 6 of the red sprigs at various points around the page. Each time I add a new type of flower or foliage, It's important to make sure that the overall composition feels balanced by ensuring there's an even distribution of that particular element around the page. In a way, it makes it look like the flowers are mixed in with each other in quite a random fashion, but each one is actually considered and therefore the composition feels comfortable to look at. When editing this video, I tried to make sure that you could see how I've painted the first one or two of each type of flower in real time and then sped up the painting speed of the subsequent flowers and leaves in that particular step. I'm painting each part at a nice leisurely pace, so hopefully it'll be easy to follow along to, and most importantly, not intimidating. I feel that painting with watercolours is a really nice way to relax, especially if you're feeling anxious or you've experienced a lot of stress recently. Rest is so important, but if you're anything like me, I find I need to give myself permission to rest and acknowledge its importance, to let my mind and body reset, even if it's just half an hour. And finding the type of relaxation that works for you, because everyone is different and rests in different ways. For some people, it will be by themselves, and others, time with a friend or family. I personally feel that taking the time to work out what works for you is really beneficial. Just before lockdown, a friend came over who wanted to start watercolour painting, and we had such a lovely morning painting and chatting together. It was very laid back, and I went on to actually make a mental note of how restorative I found it, spending that quality time together while doing some relaxed painting. Right, so those lovely red sprigs are now basically done. The penultimate part of the painting is the addition of some cheerful yellow flowers. Keeping hold of the same brush used for the red sprigs, rinse, blot, and then apply a really generous amount of yellow to your tray. Next, go over to the top right corner of the painting and paint 5 circles of varying sizes in a rough flower shape, avoiding contact with the foliage and tulip to the left and directly below. Then fill all these circles in until the shape you have created consists of one solid block of yellow. The next yellow flower wants to be peeping out from behind the stem of the right-hand tulip. Paint half of the rough flower shape on the left-hand side of the leaf, leaving a small gap before it touches the leaf, and then the other half on the right-hand side of the leaf, but this time with less of the yellow flower showing. Follow this with a flower to the left of the head of the bottom left-hand tulip head, and finally fourth in between the top 2 tulip heads. Finally, rinse your brush, blot, and dip your brush into some black paint. You might still have some on your tray. If not, or it's really dry, pop some more on there. This process is going to be similar to when I applied the indigo to the light purple flowers. The yellow flowers need to still be a little bit wet for this to work. Filling your brush with paint, go over to one of the yellow flowers you painted. With the tip of your brush, lightly dab a dot of paint in the centre of your flower. Do this same action on the other 3 yellow flowers until each one has a dot of black in the middle. You should notice the black starting to blend out a little. Then go round all the flowers and lightly add a second dot right next to the first one. You should find that they end up looking a bit like this. Now the final stage of the painting is the application of some stems for the flowers. This will require the use of Sap Green and the continuation of the same paintbrush. Once you've rinsed and blotted the brush, starting below the top right yellow flower, paint a thin, slightly curved line 1 centimetre in length, and then go down to the top right hand red sprig and paint a 1 centimetre line which sits diagonally. After this, moving in a rotation around the painting, add in small stems to all the flowers that have a space directly below them. The stems should all be angled towards the bottom middle of the painting, often with a slight curve. For specific measurements of the rest of the stems, please take a look in the description box. Each stem is described in the order that I've painted them. If you find having the measurements helpful as a reference, then do bear that in mind. And there it is, the completed painting. Fresh, bright, and inspired by the colours of spring. Thank you so much for watching, and if you decided to follow along with the tutorial, then I would be absolutely delighted to know how it went. Until next time, stay safe, much love and happy painting.